Breakfast with Robbie Buck and Wendy Harmer.
Well, did you see the powwow over the weekend of Gladys Berejiklian, the Premier, and the Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, sitting down and signing something and looking very, very pleased with themselves? Well, this was $100 million, the city deal. It's obviously not the price of a rail link to Badgerys Creek. That's more like about 6 or 7 billion, but it looks like it's a pretty good start. Paul Fletcher is the Federal Minister for Infrastructure. He joins us now. G'day there, Paul.
Good morning, Wendy and Robbie.
Good morning.
Now, Minister, I must say, this is quite an unusual happening in Western Sydney. You have the tick from how many mayors here? There seems to be a great agreement on this one. You've been ticked off by the Blue Mountain City Council, Camden, Campbelltown, Hawkesbury, Fairfield, Liverpool, Penrith, and the Wallandilly Shire. Everyone is saying that you've got this one right. So tell us what you're looking at here. Where is the route for this link to Badgerys Creek?
Well, look, that's right, Wendy. It is very significant. It's what we're calling the Western Sydney City Deal. So it's a formal agreement between the Commonwealth Government, the State Government, and very importantly, 8 Western Sydney councils. And it's designed to deliver an integrated plan for the prosperity and livability of Western Sydney and to leverage the very substantial investment being made by Commonwealth and state governments, so the $5.3 billion that's being invested to deliver Western Sydney Airport, the $3.6 billion for the Western Sydney Infrastructure Plan. That's a whole series of new roads, and just last week we announced the route for the M12 that will run from the airport to connect to the M7 and into the Sydney motorway network. Now, the Western Sydney City Deal is something that was announced by Prime Minister Turnbull and then Premier Baird in mid-2016, and since that time a huge amount of work has been done by the Commonwealth and state governments working with the 8 local councils, and I do particularly want to congratulate the councils and their mayors for the degree of forward thinking that they've engaged in here. This is about thinking about Western Sydney as a region. Over the next 20 years, just in those 8 councils, there'll be an additional 500,000 people expected to be living in those areas. Mm-hmm. So this is about a long-term plan for the infrastructure. For the
can you give us, Minister? Can you give us a little bit more detail, though? I guess people listening to this, if you live in Western Sydney, you want to know, well, where exactly is the road going to go, and indeed, where is the rail line going to go? I noticed that the Premier, Gladys Berejiklian, said the business case will determine the route, station locations, and final cost. Can you give us some detail?
Yes, Robbie. So what we have committed to is that there will be a rail line from St Mary's, which is on the existing T1 Western line, running south down to the airport and then to what we're calling the Badgerys Creek Aerotropolis, which is 2 or 3 kilometres just south of the airport. We've said that there's a joint objective of the 2 governments to have that in place when the airport opens, and the immediate next step is that we're going to spend up to $100 million on preparing a very detailed business case. That's a lot of money because this is a key step in the planning of this rail route, and it's now standard practice. It's the same thing that's been done, for example, with Sydney Metro Northwest, which the state government is presently delivering. And what that will do is finalise the precise route, the precise station locations, and then once that is done, we will then be in a position to have a more precise cost estimate. But as Wendy rightly said in her introduction, the estimated cost from St Mary's down to the Aerotropolis via the airport is around $7 billion.
Okay.
Yep.
I think the interesting thing here is, Minister, is that that you've done something here that the councils have been talking about for a while. It is, rather than get another sort of radial into the Sydney Rail network, you've gone with another spoke rather. You've gone with a radial. So you've gone around from St Mary's through the airport and down, and you talk about that as being like a steel spine. What do you mean by that?
You're exactly right. That's a really important feature of this. The idea is that the north-south rail link will be the spine of the third city, and it will run through Western Sydney Airport. The vision of the Greater Sydney Commission, which of course is the planning organisation established by the New South Wales government that's been working now for some years, is that we have three cities in the broader Sydney metropolitan area, and the third city is the Western Parkland city. And now this north-south rail is going to be the spine of that. What we have also been doing over the past couple of years is working on what's called the Western Sydney Rail Needs Scoping Study, more jargon there, and that we also released that over the weekend, and that lays out effectively a 30 to 40 year vision of which St Mary's to the airport and the Badgerys Creek Aerotropolis is the first stage. But the point the councils have been making, and many other people in the community consultation we did, is that Sydney's rail network, as you rightly say, today is essentially radial. And so it runs from west to east. So you've got the T1 Western line, you've got lines coming up from the southwest. And what that means is that if you live in, say, Campbelltown or Macarthur in the southwest, or if you live, say, in Schofield, around and Rouse Hill in the northwest, it's actually quite hard to use public transport to move north or south to get, for example, from your home to work elsewhere in Western Sydney. And so the transport plan here is part of the broader vision of getting more jobs and employment into Western Sydney, and of course the airport will be a key jobs generator, and the Aerotropolis, which we had a fair bit to say about yesterday, will be a key part of that.
Of course, we should go, Minister, straight to the nub of this one, though. You've got another $7 billion to find. Where is that going to come from?
Well, what we've said is the two governments will commit 50-50 to the cost. The first thing we need to do is to complete the business case, so we've got a more precise idea of the cost. Of course, in terms of the Commonwealth Government's contribution, in last year's budget, what we said was that we intended to spend $10 billion over the next 10 years on city-shaping transformational rail projects around our big cities and surrounding regional areas. So certainly, from a Commonwealth point of view, we've signalled an intention to invest significant amounts in rail in our major cities, and this is precisely the kind of project that we had in mind. I'll obviously leave the New South Wales Government to speak for themselves, but it's pretty clear what a financially well-managed government the Berejiklian government is, and so when they make these kind of commitments, they do so with a clear eye to their capacity to meet them.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate your time.
Thanks, Wendy. Thanks, Robbie.
Thank you.
There's Paul Fletcher. He's the Federal Minister for Infrastructure. I think it's quite interesting in this one. I guess we've just got to shift our thinking here in some ways, Robbie, because as the people of Western Sydney in the leadership dialogue, I guess they point out, we've got to stop thinking of this as Sydney's second airport and Western Sydney's first airport. So that a lot of the connections will come from Western Sydney itself to this airport, rather than
they're
thinking
coming from the city here.
Than the city. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Fair point. Well, we did have a comment about the word Aerotropolis, which I thought was pretty funny. Utopia does get brought up a couple of times on the text line. It is a lovely name, isn't it? The Aerotropolis. Coming up next.